Hey everyone, my name is Scott and welcome back to the channel and another episode of What I've Been Watching, where we talk about what I've been watching. It's been a while. I've watched a lot of back catalog stuff, but there is some new stuff I've watched that we will mix in. Let's get started. Can You Ever Forgive Me is a film starring Melissa McCarthy as a down-on-her-luck biography writer. She's at odds with her agent and with her publisher. Her last couple books haven't sold very well, so she has resorted to selling her belongings to make ends meet. One of these belongings being a letter that a famous person wrote to one of their friends. And it sells for a pretty lofty sum. So Melissa McCarthy's character has the idea to start forging documents to make ends meet. And I actually really like Melissa McCarthy in this role, which is not a comedic role whatsoever. It's mostly dramatic. There is some comedy along the way, but it's not intentional. It's just coming from around the house of cards she lives in falling down around her. She's really good, and I'd like to see her do more drama along her career. More than what she's doing now, which is bad Netflix comedies. Where this movie kind of lost me was after the forgery story kind of wraps up, there's this whole coda, which is about her relationship with her, at times, best friend. It's a very antagonistic relationship they have at times. And because of that, I don't think I was as invested as they wanted me to be. Like, the end of this movie is a lot of time spent with these two characters in a coffee shop talking about their problems. And I was just more invested in the forgery aspect of the story than I was their relationship. And it's not that I thought that their relationship drama was bad, I just wish the resolution wasn't so backloaded. But Melissa McCarthy shows some promise as a dramatic actress. I'd like to see more from her. Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always is one of two very somber movies I watched throughout this period of my life. It is the story of a high school-aged girl who, because of circumstances at home and the state she lives in requiring parental consent, travels with a friend to New York City to get an abortion. This is a very subtle and somber film about this subject matter. You get the feeling throughout the film's running time that, given any other circumstances in their lives, that this would be a celebratory trip for these girls. But whenever something somewhat positive comes their way, there's always an eye of skepticism when it comes to it because of why they are in New York. And given their home circumstances and their limited resources, any barrier that's put in their path seems monumental. This movie contains spectacular performances from both its lead actresses, especially Sydney Flanagan, who plays our main character. There is a jaw-dropping single-shot take in the middle of this film, which is heartbreaking. It's the scene in which the film gets its name. It's a single, uninterrupted shot of her face as she answers a series of questions, and it is heartbreaking. But this is a film that feels very immediate. It feels like it's very necessary for this moment in time, and just highlights that life is complicated. The Brothers Grimsby is about a soccer hooligan played by Sacha Baron Cohen who hunts down and finds his long-lost brother played by Mark Strong, who is now a secret agent. And begin the shenanigans. This movie became somewhat notorious for a bit they did on the Jimmy Kimmel Show, where, knowing that Sacha couldn't show this clip from the movie, he instead shows the clip to Jimmy Kimmel's audience, and we get to see Jimmy Kimmel's audience's reaction. As a piece of marketing, it's genius, because this is a film that is completely built around that sequence. That sequence is shocking, and I have no idea how they got an R rating. Having seen the uncut version of this sequence, the things the MPAA made them cut out to get the R rating are questionable. I don't know why they had the problems with what they had the problems with, if that makes any sense. And what's left on film is a jaw-dropping R-rated sequence. I don't know if it's necessarily funny, it's meant to be shocking, and that's what we saw through that Jimmy Kimmel clip. But outside of that, you do get the sense that the creators of this film had a couple different set pieces in mind and built an entire storyline around those funny ideas. They're not deep, funny ideas. They're not necessarily always funny ideas, but it's a very simple movie that has one huge set piece in the middle that it's built around, and I don't know if it's necessarily worth watching because of that. The film is largely laugh-free. Even that sequence is laugh-free. Like I said, it's meant to be shocking. It has some funny moments towards its end, but for the large part, it's worth watching if you want to see a weird piece of MPAA ratings board history, but not much to go on other than that. Annette is... not yet, Annette. Not yet. I have plans for you. Red Dawn is a remake of a not very good original film, and it's not a very good remake. Why does this thing exist? Like, the original is fine. It's not a movie that needs to be remade. It's not all that dated. And what they did to update this film, they ended up cutting and digitally altering so it's not as offensive as it could have been. And by offensive, I mean that at the last second, the antagonists to this film were changed so that it wouldn't become a problem for the United States. The original wasn't great in my opinion, and this is not memorable at all. The winning season stars Sam Rockwell, who is an actor that I would watch paint dry. But this movie is about, and stop me if you've heard this plot before, a down-on-his-luck former high school athlete who is asked to come coach a high school team full of misfits, and along the way they learn more about themselves and the coach learns more about himself. Yeah, these movies are a dime a dozen, and Sam Rockwell does not make this source material better. There's about 500 movies off the top of my head that I can name that have this exact plot and are more worth your time. The Man Who Killed Don Quixote is a long gestating film from director Terry Gilliam. Over the last, I'm going to say decade, Terry Gilliam has tried to get this project off the ground, with not much success. The most successful attempt was chronicled in the movie Lost in La Mancha, a documentary about the first attempt at getting this on film. That story is tragic and heartbreaking and a great look behind the scenes at making a feature film which doesn't come to fruition. Only about 15 minutes of the original movie exists, because that's all they were able to shoot before everything went to hell. But Gilliam never gave up on the project, and it finally exists, starring Adam Driver. I'm interested to know how much this movie changed from its original concept to the finished feature. This movie is a movie that seems affected by all the failed attempts to make it originally. You can't walk away from this film and say that Terry Gilliam didn't work those narratives into the final film. It's a film that is unexpected. It's not what I expected it to be, but it's altogether better because of it. Adam Driver is often hilarious. The supporting performances are all great. It's whimsical and funny throughout its running time and gets ridiculous, as most Gilliam films do. I'm glad that Terry Gilliam fought for this thing. I'm glad this project exists because it is a fascinating look and kind of a weird puzzle box of things to unlock. We will never know how much this movie changed throughout its gestation, but the resulting film is highly entertaining. I rewatched Crawl, which is Alexandra Aja's 2019 giant alligator film, which is way better than it has any right to be. My review for this film is elsewhere on this channel. It's a ton of fun. The Assistant is the second of two very somber films I watched throughout this period of my life. This film is a day in the life of an assistant to a very powerful movie mogul who does some questionable things in his day-to-day life. It's the Harvey Weinstein story. They go throughout its entire running time without it being about Harvey Weinstein, but this movie is about Harvey Weinstein, or more about the people who surrounded Harvey Weinstein. The biggest criticism I see of this film around the internet is that nothing really happens throughout the film's running time. And I get that. It's true to a certain extent. This woman goes throughout her day making coffee, running interference for her boss, working in a place that is an obvious hostile work environment, but stays quiet because the cost of speaking out somewhat outweighs the upside of what she could become if she just kept her mouth shut. And in that way, you see how something like the Miramax situation happened. You could say something and end your career, or you could keep getting promoted. It's a hostile work environment that's meant to fester on fear and the hope of promotion. And the fact that nothing major happens throughout this film's running time is somewhat the point. These situations are designed to keep going because the cost of speaking out is too great, especially among people that are young and have aspirations for bigger things. This is a very subtle movie. It's probably one of the most subtle movies I've ever seen. It's not a movie that comes out and smacks you about the face about what the film is actually about, but I think it's a very effective look at this type of situation. I really enjoyed it. It's not an easy movie to enjoy, but I did enjoy and think they were very successful in what they were trying to accomplish. The Sparks Brothers is a documentary film directed by Edgar Wright, the guy who made Shaun of the Dead, among others. Hot Fuzz, so on and so forth. His first documentary film about what they describe as your band's favorite band. The band is called Sparks and is headed up by two brothers, hence the title. And this movie chronicles their rise to underground fame. They were never really hugely famous, but they were very influential. They created electronica before electronica became famous. They seem to be at the onset of every musical trend that happened over the last several decades. But the movie's laid out in chronological order and is a look inside the workings of this group. And it's very interesting throughout its running time because of how they were on the onset of all these trends. Where the movie somewhat wavers is in its last act, where it's talking about Sparks today. Because you don't have the benefit of hindsight to see if they are on the onset of another trend, their current work seems weird compared to everything else. Will people copy that trend? We don't know, but the movie kind of wavers when it gets to its last act. It's about 10 to 15 minutes too long. But having said that, as a documentary, I was really interested throughout its entire running time. It never drags. Even in its last act, it doesn't drag. It just kind of wavers. And I said to a friend after I got done watching it, well, now I have a bunch of CDs to buy because I really want to discover this band. And that is the mark of a good documentary. Come to Daddy is a horror film starring Elijah Wood about a man who is drawn to his long-lost father to reconnect under strange circumstances. It's a movie that's interesting throughout its first two acts and then flies off the rails in its third act. It does go into some creative and unpredictable places, but overall was just kind of fine. I don't think it really stuck the landing that well. Malignant. Oh boy. Depending on how you take Malignant, it's either the worst horror film you've ever seen or the best comedy of the year. And it all kind of comes down to directorial intent. And James Wan is either trying to blow up his career with this, or he really thought he had something here and missed the mark completely. And what's confusing is the marketing campaign where it's a new vision of terror from James Wan. If that's true and they thought this was a new vision of terror, James Wan blew up his career because this movie misses the mark so badly. But as Red Letter Media pointed out, if this is James Wan pulling a Freddy Got Fingered and making a ridiculous film to have a laugh, why would he put his name on the line? Why would James Wan, a man who's had great success in the horror genre over the last 15 years, 20 years even, why would he ever do this? Why would he pull a prank on the audience like this? This is a baffling movie. It's not a good movie, but it is baffling. I can't say it's forgettable. It's a memorable movie, but it's more a curiosity than anything else in my book. All right, we're getting there. 15 Minutes of Shame is a documentary film directed by Max Joseph of Catfish fame, the TV show, and it's produced by Monica Lewinsky, and it outlines the culture of shaming people on the internet. And Monica Lewinsky is the person to go to when it comes to shaming on the internet. She was among the first ever shamed for what she did in her private life. This movie's at its best when it is telling the story of people who have been shamed online. The people who have been shamed largely do not have the benefit of context. And this movie is very good at laying out the context leading up to their shaming and what happened to them afterwards. Where the movie kind of lost me is when it gets into that history of shaming. It's well-worn territory. If you've never seen a documentary about the perils of online life, this will be all new to you, and it's all well done, but it doesn't break any new ground or look at it from a different angle from what I've seen in other films of this sort. But given that Lewinsky and Max Joseph are acutely aware of the perils of online life, they are good authorities on the subject, and it's an interesting look at this culture. It's well done. It's never slow. It doesn't drag on, but it does tread some familiar ground. 3 rewatches in a row. Apollo 13, apart from some composite shots that haven't aged very well, does age really well, and that's based on the strength of the performances from Tom Hanks, Kevin Bacon, Gary Sinise, Bill Paxton, Ed Harris. This movie's loaded with great actors. It is among, if not the best Ron Howard movie. I would put Rush and Cinderella Man up there with Apollo 13 among Ron Howard's best movies. Just like Crawl, the Evil Dead remake is better than it has any right to be. It improves on the more weak aspects of Sam Raimi's original film while being just so gory, guys. This movie is one of the goriest movies I've ever seen. I have no idea how this thing got the R rating, but it is highly entertaining and beautiful at times. This has some gorgeous shots in it. John Wick Chapter 3 expands on the universe of John Wick in an interesting way. It's more ridiculous than the first two in a lot of different ways. I don't know if the expansion is all that well orchestrated, but this movie is still a heck of a good time and has some of the best action sequences of the John Wick series. John Wick bringing Indonesian-style action to America. I like it. All right, new watch. If you would have told me after watching All the Real Girls that David Gordon Green would go from indie filmmaker to hooking up with Seth Rogen and making a stoner comedy, to making Eastbound and Down, to directing a direct sequel to John Carpenter's Halloween, I would have told you that trajectory of filmmaking is crazy and will never happen. But here we are, David Gordon Green and Danny McBride making a Halloween movie. Like I said, this is a direct sequel to John Carpenter's original Halloween. It ignores and retcons all of the sequels. That includes the original sequels and Rob Zombie's remakes. But it doesn't really do anything new. I mean, Michael Myers gets out of the facility that he is currently in and hunts down Laurie Strode, played by Jamie Lee Curtis once again. And we find Laurie battle-tested. She's armed herself. She's ready for this thing to happen. But now she has a family she has to protect. I found the first third of this film to be kind of boring. It's a lot of retconning and it's a lot of long-winded retread of things, if you've seen the original Halloween, that we already know. After I got done watching this film, I got thinking about Terminator 2 because the jump that Sarah Connor made from the original to the sequel is drastic. She's very, very strong in the second movie, but we buy it as an audience because it's set up so well. And set up quickly, within the first 10 minutes of Terminator 2 starting. I feel that this film could have done that with Laurie Strode, but just didn't. It took the long way to get there. The film gets some wind in its sails once it hits its second and third act, but it's not anything we haven't seen in horror movies before. There's a lot of sequences that are very similar to other films. There's a very good single shot take as we follow Michael Myers around a series of Halloween parties, but it doesn't lead to anything scary. This movie's not very scary at all. And that is because it stands on the back of giants and recreates sequences we have seen in other better horror films. But ultimately, I don't think this movie justifies its own existence. There doesn't seem to be a lot of love for the source material on display here. Just seems to be a paint-by-number sequel to a movie series that already had a number of paint-by-number sequels. It's a more realistic film. Michael Myers doesn't seem like a superhuman, but I was okay with it, even if I didn't find it necessary. There are a lot of horror movies out there that aren't built on existing IPs that are worth your time. I'm not sure that this movie is worth your time. Worth your time is One Cut of the Dead, another movie I rewatched. It's a Shudder original. Don't look up anything about it. It's a Japanese language film. It's a zombie film about a movie that's being made when a zombie attack occurs. A real zombie attack. And it flips the genre on its head about halfway through. I tell everyone about it, and then I tell them, look them in their eyes and say, this movie runs 90 minutes. You're going to think it's over way before it's over. But just a ton of fun, very well done, very creative. I really enjoy this film. I bought it the day after I watched it the first time. If you get it on DVD, first off, the cover is a spoiler. The back is definitely a spoiler. And it defaults to English language with, it's overdubbed and it's bad. So go Japanese and English subtitles. It's my recommendation. And that is it. What have you guys been watching? Anything cool? Dune is out. I'm hoping to watch it maybe tonight. I don't know. I'll get to it at some point in time. I got a list of movies and a stack of Blu-rays to knock out. So what have you guys been watching? I'll see you in comments, and I will see you next time on What I've Been Watching. Hopefully it won't be as long as it was since the last episode. Adios.